All right, today we're cracking open a real historical case file on a foundational text of the New Testament, the first epistle of Peter. For 2,000 years, its message of hope in the face of some really tough times has just echoed through history.
But here's the thing. Behind this powerful letter lies a fascinating literary mystery. See, the document claims it's from the Apostle Peter himself, but modern scholars have found clues, kind of hidden in plain sight, that tell a very different story. So the question is simple, but the answer? Well, that's where it gets complicated. Who was the true author? Let's follow the evidence.
Okay, so right off the bat, the letter opens with a clear declaration. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ. For most of history, that was pretty much the end of the story. Case closed. And you can totally see why everyone went with it for so long. I mean, this is Peter we're talking about, the leader of the apostles, an eyewitness to Jesus' ministry. His name gave this summary of Christian faith some serious authority. It was like getting a direct message from the rock on whom the church was built.
But then modern scholarship came along, kind of like a detective with new forensic tools. As our ways of analyzing history and literature got more sophisticated, scholars started to find these little inconsistencies, clues woven right into the text that just don't quite line up with what we know about the historical Peter. And these clues have opened up a really compelling case that points to a different author entirely.
So let's pop open that evidence file, shall we? Let's take a look at the clues that have led so many to question who traditionally gets the credit for this letter.
Okay, Exhibit A, the language itself. The Greek in this letter isn't just basic get the point across Greek. Oh no, it's polished, it's elegant, and it shows a masterful command of rhetoric.
Now this is where things get really interesting. See, the book of Acts describes Peter as an uneducated, common man, a fisherman from Galilee, whose first language was Aramaic. So you have to ask, how could he turn around and write a letter in such masterful literary Greek?
I mean, we're talking about someone using these really complex rhetorical tricks and sentence structures, the kind of stuff that suggests a formal education in Greek rhetoric. And get this, every time they quote the Old Testament, it's from the Septuagint, that's the Greek translation. This is the calling card of an author who is not just fluent, but really well educated in a Greek-speaking world, not an Aramaic-speaking fisherman from a rural province.
All right, clue number 2 is, well, it's about what's not there. For a letter supposedly written by Jesus' closest disciple, it's weirdly quiet when it comes to personal experience.
Seriously, just think about it for a second. If you were Peter, wouldn't your letter be packed with personal stories? I remember when Jesus said this, or I saw him do that. But you just don't find any of those first-hand accounts here. Even the really powerful description of Jesus' suffering isn't an eyewitness report. It's a theological reflection based on a prophecy from Isaiah. The author seems to be drawing from the common well of early Christian tradition, not from their own personal memory.
Next up, clue number 3. This one's a big one, because it points to a strong theological connection, not to the historical Peter, but to another giant of the early church, the Apostle Paul.
You look at these passages side by side and it's just, wow, the overlap is incredible. Key ideas about submitting to government, not getting revenge, and using your gifts to serve others, they all echo Paul's teachings, especially from his letter to the Romans. This suggests the author was deeply familiar with Pauline theology, which was a school of thought that really took off in the second half of the first century.
And that brings us to our final clue, which is all about geography and timing, and it's locked right into the letter's opening lines.
So the letter is addressed to Christians across 5 different Roman provinces. Here's the problem. That particular map of Roman provinces, it just didn't exist when Peter was alive, around 65 AD. On top of that, the kind of suffering the letter talks about, social slander, local harassment, being treated like an outsider, that perfectly matches the vibe of what Christians were dealing with at the end of the first century, decades after Peter was gone.
So you add it all up, and what do you get? Well, the scholarly consensus is that the letter is likely pseudonymous. Now that sounds bad, like a forgery, but it was a really common and accepted practice back then. You'd write in the name of a famous teacher to honor them and give their authority to your work. In this case, it was also a genius move to unite the early church by showing that the teachings of its 2 biggest stars, Peter and Paul, were actually in perfect harmony. So once we understand that the letter was probably written later by a follower of Peter, it actually helps us unlock its true purpose. Now the question isn't just who wrote it, but why. And to find that answer, we have to look at who it was written for.
The author uses this phrase, resident aliens or visiting strangers. And you gotta understand, this wasn't just flowery language. He was writing to marginalized communities, probably people of a lower social class, who literally felt like outsiders in their own towns, estranged from the dominant culture around them. And this is where the letter gets absolutely brilliant. The author looks at these people who feel like nobody and gives them a brand new identity. He reaches way back into Israel's sacred history and gives them its most honored titles. Just think about how that would feel. To people who felt they had no status, he says, "You are a chosen race." To those who felt powerless, he says, "You are a royal priesthood." To those who felt like a scattered minority, he says, "No, you are a holy nation, God's very own people." He didn't just offer comfort, he gave them their dignity back.
So, with this new, powerful identity established, the letter gets to its main mission: to give these communities a practical, spiritual guide for how to endure suffering in a world that wasn't exactly friendly. The core message here completely flips the script on what it means to suffer. The author argues that hardship isn't a sign that God is mad at you. Just the opposite. To suffer for doing the right thing is the ultimate sign of God's approval. It's a way of walking directly in Christ's footsteps, turning public shame into divine honor. But, and this is a huge but, the author is super clear about one thing: not all suffering is the same. There's no credit, no honor in suffering because you broke the law or you were being a jerk. But suffering just because of who you are as a Christian, that, he says, connects you directly to Christ's own story. For people facing daily harassment, this was a revolutionary and really empowering message. So when you take a step back and look at the whole case, the historical mystery and the deep pastoral purpose, you can finally see the true, lasting power of this ancient letter. In the end, maybe it doesn't matter who literally held the pen. The author's goal is crystal clear. This letter was a lifeline, thrown to communities that were scattered and struggling. It was a call to stand firm, to live with such integrity that their lives became a powerful testimony, and to find their real home, not in a society that rejected them, but in their new identity in God.
Which leaves us with a final question to chew on. This whole authorship puzzle is a fascinating piece of history, and it tells us so much about the early church. But when a message of hope and endurance is so powerful that it still speaks to people 2,000 years later, does knowing the specific author's name really change the power of the words themselves? That's something to think about.